Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Sheen Magazine, Sheen Talk on YouTube. My name is Laura Miller, and I'm here with a freedom fighter, Jennifer Bonjean, Esquire, of the Bonjean Law Group. Thank you so much for joining me today, Jennifer. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. So first thing, you guys that are watching, there's some important topics that we're going to discuss today. And of course, we wanted to let you know that the views expressed during this conversation are that of myself and Jennifer Bonjean, Esquire, and do not directly reflect the magazine. However, by saying that, you guys know me, we're going to dig into whatever we feel compelled to do. So buckle up, everyone. Obviously, we also welcome comments in the comment section on YouTube. So if you have any questions for Ms. Bonjean or you have any questions for this segment specifically, feel free to be as active as you can throughout this broadcast. Now, first things first, I have to talk about the power suit. Because if I think about scandal and I think about high-powered attorneys, and I think about those type of things, one piece of attire that is extremely important is the business suit. So I need to know, and I think the listeners need to know, what type of suit makes you feel, what brand makes you feel at your most powerful when you enter these courtrooms?
Great question. I love a question like that. So I wear all types of suits, but I think recently I have been drawn to a brand called Veronica Beard, and I wear a lot of her suits. I have, there's another brand, they have the worst name. It's called Suit Supply, but it's these young designers. I think they're from Amsterdam. I love their suits. And of course, I love an Armani suit and, you know, some of the more high brow, you know, suits. But honestly, you know, I don't have a wardrobe full of those suits. I mean, but my shoes are a different matter. I love a Louboutin, a red bottom when I go into court. And I'm sort of kind of known for having those. I don't know. Once I put those on, I feel like, you know, I can accomplish anything. And I tend to wear a more masculine suit. Like I am definitely not a short skirt type of gal when I go into court. I just don't want, you know, we should be able to wear whatever the hell we want in court, but I don't want to be distracting, you know, and we know people can get distracted by that. So, but I put on, I wear a high heel in court, and that's sort of my power move when I go into court.
So you mentioned the Louboutins, but have you seen the Louboutin loafers?
I have.
They look so amazing. Honestly, I think that's the only thing in my bracket that I could afford at this juncture. So I'm like, okay, that's reasonable. $600 for those loafers. Also, they're patent leather and they're piped line. The stitching is amazing. So that's going to be my first Louboutin purchase for sure. I thank you so much for answering that question, because I know it's like, no, Lord, nobody asked me these type of questions.
I don't always get them, but I love them.
Yeah. So you know what? You mentioned something very important when it came to the power suits with the skirts. Now, recently you've been trending quite a bit as it relates to the wonderful city that I call home, Chicago, related to a judge that just absolutely spoke out of turn on a hot mic recently.
I mean, really.
I feel like, and just to give you guys some information, the Bonjean Law Group focuses primarily on wrongful convictions, vacated sentences, and conviction overturns. Now, you might be familiar with Ms. Bonjean from her higher profile clients, but this woman has about 2 decades, if not more, experience in appellate trials and overturning convictions. So needless to say, you might know about the Bill Cosbys of the world or Kanye shouting you out in Drink Champs. But Jennifer has a really hard job as it relates to things that she covers. And to me, and to comment on, you know, Jennifer in the bedroom in the courtroom sequence, the misogyny takes its toll, I imagine. So I'm just wondering for you, is that something that you've had to deal with before on a non-viral national publication scale?
So yes, not at that level though, right? Like, and I have no doubt that he's not the first judge to talk crap about me behind closed doors. But I have dealt with, subtle sexism for pretty much my whole career. But you know how it goes. And it's the same for, I guess, I would say it's probably the same for people of color, that you hear something, you're like, that seems vaguely racist.
Mhm.
But, you're not going to call someone out necessarily. You don't want to, make a big deal of it. You're just kind of like, maybe, it's all about intent, right? Like, how can I really know what the intent is? Because often people are very slick. They say things in a slick way, and you kind of experience it the way you believe they intended it, but they have plausible deniability. So if you actually called them out, they'd be like, oh, they'd gaslight you and be like, no, I didn't mean it that way. You're crazy. So, that happens a lot. And I make a mental note of it. Sometimes I actually make a written note of it, like, oh, this judge, said this, and I'm going to keep an eye. It raises your eyebrow. So that happens a lot. It's happened my whole career. This was a whole different thing. He's on a hot mic, literally pontificating about how horrible it would be to share a bed with me, as if, and I have a case pending before this man. It's a wrongful conviction case. His name is Roosevelt Miles. He's completed 30 years of a sentence for a crime he did not do. And here, this judge is more concerned about talking about, visualizing, I guess, some sexual experience with me. I don't know what other conclusion to draw from it. And yeah, it's icky. And it also just troubles me that my client has to, he wasn't going to recuse himself. He recused himself because he got caught.
Exactly.
So it's mind-boggling that that's what judges are thinking about when they're making some of the most important decisions that they face.
You know what? And what you said about the advances, a lot of times with sexism, racism, any of those intersectionality related subjects, there are so many unspoken nonverbal cues that occur there that oftentimes it can be challenging to identify or say or put pen to paper. This is what's happening. But I mean, in this particular case, it's wonderful because it's like, oh, look what you did for me.
Yeah. That inside voice came outside, right?
Yeah.
Not only that, he thought it was a point of conversation. I don't know if people understand this, if they've read about it, but he was literally sitting on the bench with his robe on. This wasn't in a bar somewhere. It wasn't even in his chambers. He's sitting on the bench with his robe on in an open courtroom that anybody can walk into, on a hot mic, which he clearly didn't know he was on the hot mic, talking to courtroom personnel. So not only did he think this thing, which is bad enough, but he also let it come out of his mouth and thought it would be a point of conversation, which just makes you go, what is going on in Cook County?
So many things, as you know. It's an interesting place. But speaking of that, and like I said, the cases that you have are so unique. I want to ask you a question that I know it's not necessarily off the cuff, but I have to know. You could have been an amazing attorney in any section of the law. You could have been a corporate law attorney, and all of your day would have consisted of paperwork and safety, going home and just living a very easy and peaceful life. However, you've chosen to tackle issues that affect 1% of the prison population, over 20,000 people in the United States. You picked wrongful convictions and exonerations. That is a very aggressive choice, and I imagine it's not always the safest choice. I'd just like to know how your passion compelled you to this particular sect of law.
It's a great question. And yes, I probably could have gone down many paths. Even if you wanted to be a litigator, I could have chosen different subject matters, right? But I just, I don't know, like it was something that resonated with me long ago. the unfairness that I saw. I always tell this story that to anyone who's interested, that when I clerked in the public defender's office when I was in law school down at 26th Street in Cook County, I went like my very first days there, and I was just blown away by what I saw. First of all, I saw just one Black man after the next come before the court. And it just shocked me in a way that the visual of it. Of course, you hear statistics about people of color and how they're disproportionately affected by the criminal justice system, but the visual of it. And what even struck me more is how normal and routine everybody seemed to think it was. And I said to myself, I don't ever want to forget my first impressions of this place. I'm never going to get so jaded that I think, oh, this is normal. Yeah, this is just totally normal. Of course, it's not normal. It's not normal. There's something bigger here. There's something more important that we should be discussing, why people of color are disproportionately impacted by the criminal justice system. There's so much we could go in any directions talking about that. But that unfairness to me, I know I was married to a trader, a Wall Street type of guy. And I know that drug use is very prevalent in that community. And
sure.
I don't see white people coming through for drug cases. So what is going on here? How we're over policing certain communities, letting other communities slide. Those are the types of things that were going through my brain as a young attorney, or on the heels of being an attorney. And I thought, I'm never going to forget this. And this overall systemic racism in this system really struck me. And I just knew that was where I wanted to put my energies and try to make a difference.
Love that. So speaking of wrongful convictions, I picked up a story regarding a Marion, Illinois man, David Ian Blue. And the first thing that I want to tell our viewers is Marion, Illinois is a very small town in the central to southern part of Illinois. The closest thing that has notoriety is Southern Illinois University. But the most jarring thing that I found out about Marion is the population percentage. It's the first time I've ever seen this, Jennifer. It is 94% white, but 0.4% African American.
Yeah.
Do you guys understand how small the population has to be in order for it not to even be a whole number in the percentage?
Yeah.
So can you tell me briefly about David Ian Blue? And he's claiming innocence from being wrongfully convicted. So can you tell me why specifically your team and the Blue family believes that they've been wrongfully convicted?
Yes, sure. So David is a case that I took, a few months ago, and I was just shocked by what I saw. David is an African-American man who lived in this community, married to a white woman. He may be the 0.4% as far as I know. It is a almost entirely white community. And he was and is a wonderful man, no criminal background, not a hint of anything improper in his life or his family's life. He comes from a long history of medical professionals. His brother's a doctor. He was a nurse, a specialized nurse. David was. He doesn't have other family directly in the area. I think they have family in Texas. He has this wonderful, beautiful family. He is a wonderful, beautiful person. And he's married to a woman. They together adopt some children who come from this traumatic early childhood that were DCFS wards. It's, honestly, just really inspiring person. And then he ends up going through a very ugly divorce with his wife. And out of nowhere comes an allegation of sexually abusing their adopted daughter, who was approximately 11 years old. This comes out of nowhere in about 2019. So he's living with this child for years, no hint of anything untoward happening, but coincidentally, when there is this ugly, nasty divorce, there's an allegation that comes forward. And it would seem that law enforcement was eager to confirm that allegation, which they ultimately really didn't do. And then he's charged, prosecuted, and in my view, wrongly convicted for it.
So one thing that you mentioned, so it kind of feels like a woman scorn situation. And of course, neither of us would be insensitive as it relates to the needs or trauma associated with a child. However, as you stated, there are things that kind of provide doubt. Can you explain to me, is there for a case like this, is it the same where it's beyond a reasonable doubt that person is convicted, or is it reasonable suspicion it's okay? Because I thought those were only civil cases.
Right. So, of course, in a criminal case, the burden of proof, which sits with the prosecution, is always proof beyond a reasonable doubt. But we do find in sex cases, any case involves a sexual allegation, particularly against a child. And in this particular era, the era of Me Too, we are seeing that kind of the presumption of innocence is going out the window. As soon as an allegation is made, it's believe women, without any vetting of the allegations, or in this case, believe a child. Although I am not convinced that the allegation came from the child ultimately. And I'll tell you why in a minute. And then, so it appears as if the burden of proof goes down in these cases. You don't need as much evidence to prove it. And then the presumption of innocence also kind of evaporates. So it's a real problem, particularly in cases involving allegations of sex crimes. And there is then a increased risk of a wrongful conviction, right? And that, I believe, is what occurred here. And I should point out that, yes, this is not about bashing any child but children, and this is a child who had developmental delays, early childhood trauma that had nothing to do with the blues, but had everything to do with her birth family. And then you also she had behavioral issues, a lot of issues that probably stem from childhood trauma. So you have a child who is already coming with a whole host of challenges. And one of those challenges could very well be, and I think the evidence showed, that she was highly suggestible. She was eager to please whoever's asking her questions. Even her mother admitted that she wasn't a concrete thinker, couldn't really put timestamps on things. So to me, this is like a recipe for disaster of how you could get a child to potentially buy into an allegation that, with time, unfortunately, memory can be corrupted. And you can even convince a child that something happened to them that never happened to them. There's incredible research along those lines.
Yeah, is the word, was it confabulation or
Yes.
I'm learning new words.
Yeah. No, that's exactly right. Where you take, things that actually happened that you remember, and then they get, so there were suggestions that there may have been other, again, allegations of abuse in the past. So if you're not a concrete thinker as a child and you can't put a timestamp on that thing, you could take an event that maybe happened in the past and confabulate it with what's happening now. And you just add some reinforcement from law enforcement and people that you look up to and people that you think you're supposed to please. And all of a sudden, there's a narrative that is false. And it's lodged against someone who is innocent. And that makes her a victim as well.
For sure.
And I argued that recently. She's a victim. Make no mistake about it. She's just not a victim of her father. Yeah. And that is, it's tragic for so many people. So those are concerns that we have about this particular allegation.
So the justice system, I read some materials on this case specifically. There is no DNA evidence or anything that ties Mr. Blue to anything pertaining to this happening. So it seems like it's just, I hate to say it, a Emmett Till whistle that me type of situation. And the judgment was based on one person's account of the situation. Is that fair?
It's even worse than that.
Oh, yeah.
It's even worse than that, because the only evidence that came in at trial legitimately, meaning the judge did consider some things that she was not supposed to consider, or we don't even know entirely what she was looking at, but that's a whole nother matter. But the only evidence really that came in was the testimony of the child herself. Mm-hmm. And she admitted on cross-examination that she didn't really even remember it happening. I mean, she admitted when she was asked a very open-ended type of question out of kind of nowhere. This wasn't like she got bullied into admitting this. Mm-hmm. She says to the defense attorney at the time, when asked, do you even really remember that this happened? And she said, no. And the question was asked again. Mm. And she admitted that she didn't really even know that whether it happened. And then a minute later, when the prosecution got up and cross-examined her, she flipped back. Mm. So what I argued and what I think is important here is that you can't just decide which version you want to credit. Where she lands isn't really we can't really have faith that that's the truth. What we do know is that she can be suggested. She's a suggestible child who can be steered in either direction. Yeah. And that should be reasonable doubt. If that's not reasonable doubt, I don't know what is.
Yeah, because I don't think that I can make heads or tails of it, even with my illustrious experience and background on Law and Order Special Victims Unit, right? Like, I don't think Olivia Benson would have been comfortable sending this to whichever ADA she had at the time, because she's had quite a few. I don't think that. And again, it's really something that I struggled with as far as receiving this information, because it feels multi-tiered. Is it a political conviction? Is it a systemic racism type of conviction? Is it morality based? Like, I'd want to know, and I'm sure that's not something that we could share with this audience, what type of person finds finality and comfort in presenting a conviction in this way, when just by watching Law and Order, I'm unsure.
So it's a great question. And as I said, it's kind of a perfect storm. I think it's all those things. Mm-hmm. I think we would be naive to think that implicit racial bias does not play a role in these cases. Can I point to something specific that the prosecutor did or that the judge did where I can say, oh, that person definitely is motivated by race? No, because people, as we talked earlier with my anecdotal experience, that's not how it works. People are not, in this day and age, if people are going to use overt racial, if we're going to see overt racial bias, it's probably going to be behind closed doors. So we're not going to see it in the courtroom. But this is what I would say. We know how race plays a role in the criminal justice system. That has been proven over and over again, statistically, anecdotally, qualitatively, quantitatively, on every level. It is a fact. We have a community where he does not have peers in the sense of people who are people of color, right? There's no, the judges and the jury pool there are not people who look like him. And they have not necessarily experienced what it's like to be a Black man. I can guarantee that, just statistically speaking. So for us to sit here and say that race didn't play a role, I would say I'm not confident saying that. I can't say that. I would say, and I'm sure they would all object and say that's ridiculous. Of course, race didn't play a role. I think implicit bias is something people don't even realize they have sometimes. So,
tribalism is a thing also, right? So, I mean, we're talking about the people of Marion, right? This is our small knit. This is our small knit, Mayberry-esque town. And here comes high profile Jennifer Bonjean.
Gosh, yeah.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah, no,
How is that working out for you?
oh, it's funny. I will say this, that I want to make this point that actually a lot of people from the community, even
Mhm.
white folks from that community, came out in support for David Blue. Shockingly, I was surprised by how many people testified at trial saying we never, I'm talking about people that know him, neighbors, people that had direct contact with him, the people that would know the most about what he was like with his children actually came out in his favor. And there was incredible support at his sentencing hearing. So I do want to make clear that against all odds, he did have quite a bit of support from that community, not necessarily wider community, but people who actually knew him. Now, to your actual question of what it's like, I think the family was concerned initially, and why they hired a local person at first is that they didn't want to rub a potential jury pool or the judge the wrong way. But that didn't work out so well. And he was convicted ultimately. So I come in and, my style is an aggressive style. There's no two ways about it. But I just feel that we need to call out things when we see them. As I tell judges to their face sometimes, we're all an important part of this system. It's just not you up there in the black robe that's an important part of this system. I am an important part of this system. And if I see an injustice to my client, you're going to hear about it. And it's not meant as any disrespect to you. But if you did something wrong, I'm going to tell you. And that was one of the things that happened in David's case, is that the judge made some pretty catastrophic errors at trial. And his own attorney did not call them out, maybe out of fear, maybe out of not wanting to ruffle feathers. She has to live in that community. She has to practice in that court building. And sometimes you need an outsider to come in and say, this was a big mistake. You need to correct this big mistake. And again, no disrespect, but we can't have faith in a system if you're not going to correct your major error, which the record would reflect. She was considering documents and reports that weren't admitted into evidence. You can't do that. I just
don't know how that's even I just don't know how that's even a thing, to be honest with you.
No, I had to go back to 1961 to find a case where a judge had done that. It just is not something you do. Now, she suggested during the hearings that I was mistaken about that, but I went back, I looked at her findings, and you would have to ignore the ordinary and regular meaning of words. She says, I examined this and that. And I was like, wait a second.
She's like, what were you looking at?
What were you looking at? It wasn't admitted into evidence. I have the whole record here. It wasn't admitted into evidence. Why are you examining that? So
it looks like, as far as today's date, that particular judge who examined evidence that may or may not have been written down or even submitted to both the prosecution and the defense prior, denied the option to overturn the conviction. Is that correct?
That is correct. We did a motion for her to reconsider her finding, and she declined our request.
So I think about the id and the superego and those type of things in those situations. But again, like I said before, these are my views.
Yeah.
Jennifer didn't even say that. Okay. And so where are you guys right now as it relates to Williamson County? Where are we in the trial for right now?
So she did decline our motion to reconsider her finding of guilt, which is unfortunate. But we also have a motion for a new trial, which points out some of the errors that took place that denied David his constitutional rights. And these are not, a lot of people are like, oh, these are technicalities. I've heard so much about that with the Cosby case. I'm like, no, this is not a technicality. When constitutional errors happen during the course of a trial, we can't rely on the outcome of the trial, because if the process isn't fair, the finding may not be fair. That's what people need to understand. It's not just like, oh, well, this jury definitely, or in this case, a judge definitely would have found him guilty even without these errors. No, these are major constitutional errors that impact the structure of the trial. And we have raised that in a motion to the court. It's very hard for judges to recognize when they have made a mistake. And they're often disinclined to recognize those mistakes. And as I've said, I stand by our motion. She can either correct the error and do the right thing, or I'm confident that the appellate court will. And I still have faith in the process. I have to, otherwise I would go kill myself. But sometimes it takes a while. And the sad part is my clients, suffer in the process, and that's usually in jail or in prison sometimes. And that's the most heart-wrenching part of this.
Yeah, because if in fact Mr. Blue is innocent, I think that the total amount of days he's been in prison, at least several months.
Yeah,
it's too long.
Yeah.
And a family member, I have a quote from a family member. He said, Dr. Michael Blue, African Americans are only 13% of the American population, but a majority of the innocent defenders were wrongfully convicted of crimes and later exonerated. Yeah. David Ingle's case is yet another example of our biased justice system that's disproportionately unjust to communities of color. And before we leave, I just wanted to read that because, again, we don't want it to be muddied in the water or anything to be misconstrued that we are talking about a case where we have no care for the well-being of any child or any person related to sexual assault. But Attorney Bonjean made a lot of valid points during this interview that suggested, the law is set up to be just and to be non-biased. And if we are disproportionately impacted by the unbiased issues in the justice system, that is a serious problem, right? It's not something that we can just bat our eyes on. And guilt, in essence, it should be proven properly, overwhelmingly. It should be done so. And one of the main reasons that I decided to interview Attorney Bonjean is because she's fighting for the civil rights of a group of marginalized people, be that African American, minorities, impoverished. Sure. We know that there is a social hierarchy, an economic and racial hierarchy in the United States. And I just want to commend her for doing this work, because I can imagine it not being very easy and it being manipulated in text by the work that you do. So I thank you so much for coming to talk to me today.
I appreciate it. And thank you for having me on. And I just want to say that I get a lot out of the work too. I mean, I love my clients and they bring a lot to my life. So it's not just a one-way street.
I love that. So last thing, everybody knows this about me. There has to be a song. What is your Get Motivated song for the David Blue case specifically? How are you motivating yourself? What's the song?
That's a good question. We have a BLG playlist, and it's got a lot of stuff on it. I don't know that I have chosen a song for David's case specifically yet, but it reminded me that I have to. We have a lot of Rihanna on our playlist.
Yes.
I am a big fan of rap music.
So you have some Public Enemy on your playlist.
Yeah, I do. And I have 4 children. Some people don't know this about me. And all my kids love rap music. So I get to stay current. I'm a big fan of Chicago drill music. And that's some hardcore stuff. I love it. And I'm also from New York. So, I listen to Pop Smoke. I like a lot of,
wow. So you're doing better than me, because some of these guys I can't get with, but I did just recently do a feature story on Lil Durk's mom.
Mm-hmm. Really?
So, yeah. So you guys are welcome to buy that. That magazine is in stands right now. It's in January and February. So Lil Durk's mom's first feature ever.
Really? Well, I'm going to tune into that, because
I didn't mention that her favorite rapper is not Lil Durk.
That's funny. I'm a Ye fan also, despite, I mean, how can you not be?
Yeah, because he gave you a shout out in the same conversation. So it equals out. It's Kanye. That's how it works. It equals out because it leveled for you. That's how it works.
Yeah, we have a good rapport, actually.
Good. So when I recap, the song of this interview we're going to say is Fight the Power by
Okay.
Public Enemy. I think written by Flavor Flav. Surprisingly, you guys need to look up on your Public Enemy notes because Flavor Flav wrote a lot of the songs. And we'd like to thank Attorney Bonjean of the Bonjean Law Group for coming and sitting down with us today. Again, this is Laura Miller of Sheen Talk for Sheen Magazine. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lauren. Take
No
care.
problem.